Amid the dry winds of the Sahel, where the dust carries old stories of hunger and despair that the world has heard for decades, something extraordinary is quietly unfolding. It's not a coup, it's not a new aid program, it's a construction site so vast that even satellites can't ignore it. Rows of houses are rising from the desert, planned, connected to water and power, and built with purpose. And perhaps the strangest part? There isn't a single foreign corporate logo in sight. No NGO banners, no donor plaques. Every sign bears just one line: Republic of Burkina Faso, the People's City. They call it Trial City, but to the people of Burkina, it's simply home. A real home with doors, a roof, an address, and a title deed bearing their own names. It sounds ordinary, but for millions who have lived in tents and makeshift shelters, it's nothing short of revolutionary. Because for years, this nation has fought not only hunger and terrorism, but a far deeper, quieter war, the battle to reclaim the right to live with dignity. Burkina Faso, once ranked the poorest country in the world, is now doing something the richest nations never dared, building a city not to sell, but to restore dignity. The government doesn't speak of profit. It doesn't court foreign investors. It doesn't wait for the World Bank to sign a check. It says only one simple truth. If you want real peace, start by giving your people a roof over their heads. And so, tens of thousands of bricks are pressed from Sahel soil. Hundreds of engineers, soldiers, and young volunteers join forces to raise a vision that defies logic, a poor nation daring to build its own future with its own hands. While skyscrapers rise across Europe and Asia as monuments to financial power, in Burkina, each modest home stands as a symbol of silent rebellion, because they're not just building shelter, they're building resistance. When the IMF says, without capital, you can't develop, they answer with self-pressed bricks, solar panels on rooftops, and recycled water systems. They refuse to wait for permission to live, and that is what leaves the world speechless. In an era where everything is priced and monetized, Burkina Faso is redefining development through human dignity. For them, every home is not property, it's a declaration, a reminder that freedom cannot be borrowed, it must be built. As the Sahel sun sinks below the horizon, its glow reflects off the new rooftops, and people see another kind of light, not from electricity, but from faith. Children play on level ground. The elderly sit at their doorsteps watching trucks unload bricks. Young people gather to plan their next neighborhood. A nation is rebuilding not through policy, but through action. Not through aid, but through self-respect. The question now is this merely a housing project or the beginning of Africa's great rebirth? Are these walls made only of cement and sand, or of independence, confidence, and hope? If you ever thought Africa could only wait for help, this story will make you think again. And if you believe that dignity cannot be bought, only built, then follow this journey to the end. Because this isn't just the story of a city, it's the story of how one of the world's poorest nations chose to stand up and rewrite the meaning of development. Join the conversation, share your thoughts, and follow this journey, a journey of faith, dignity, and a future where people, not money, stand at the center. Because only when we understand that will we truly know what it means to build not just a city, but true independence. Before the first walls of Trial City ever rose, Burkina Faso was a land of fractures, cracks in its soil, its people, and its very soul. The earth cracked as the desert advanced with each hot season. The people cracked as war drove them away from their fields, their fragile homes, and even the memory of where they came from. And the nation cracked under decades of dependency on aid packages measured like painkillers, easing today's suffering, but never healing the wound. In less than 5 years, over 2 million Burkinabe were forced to leave the land of their birth. They walked silently along red dust roads, carrying everything they owned in a single cloth bundle. Mothers clutching children, fathers dragging wooden carts, the elderly gripping torn mats as if holding on to the last shred of home. When night fell, these internal refugees laid down plastic sheets, lit fires, and slept under a sky that no longer promised safety. They became administrative subjects, as one official coldly said. Numbers in a report no longer lives with names. On the outskirts of cities like Kaya, Dori, and Ouagadougou, tent camps sprouted like mushrooms after rain. Every morning, children queued for water trucks. Women carried buckets of murky water to wash their faces. Men crowded at gates, hoping for day labor. No one called it home. No one called it life. Yet from that barren soil, a question began to take root. If the world has forgotten us, can we still save ourselves? When Ibrahim Traoré came to power, that question stopped being a lament. It became a command. He didn't see the camps as a burden, but as a reminder that the nation had lost its core, land, and people, once inseparable, now divided. In a short meeting, he said, "If our people still sleep in tents, we have not truly regained independence." End of 2. That sentence spread through the army engineers, through villages, through the farthest reaches of the Sahel, and then, one dusty dawn, convoys of military trucks rolled toward the northern plains of Kaya. No one knew what was happening, only that for the first time, the state had come not to distribute aid, but to build. Bricks were pressed from Sahel soil on site. Power poles rose from the dry ground. It says only one simple truth. If you want real peace, start by giving your people a roof over their heads. And so, tens of thousands of bricks are pressed from Sahel soil. Hundreds of engineers, soldiers, and young volunteers join forces to raise a vision that defies logic, a poor nation daring to build its own future with its own hands. While skyscrapers rise across Europe and Asia as monuments to financial power, in Burkina, each modest home stands as a symbol of silent rebellion. "I never thought I'd live long enough to have a roof again," she whispered. Behind her, the flag of Burkina Faso fluttered in the desert wind. No speech was needed, everyone understood, a rebirth had begun. That new city was not born from money, but from pain transformed into action. It rose from the hands of those who had lost everything and were now being given back hope. It was not just a fight against poverty, but a fight against resignation, the quiet surrender that had weighed on African shoulders for centuries. As night fell, the flames from the construction site flickered across the red earth, carrying with them a silent vow. We will never sleep in tents again. For years, Burkina Faso had produced thick reports on the management of internally displaced people. But manage who? And for what? That was the question Captain Ibrahim Traoré threw onto the table the day he took office. Treating people as a burden is why we keep failing. The people are not the problem, they are the power. If we want to end chaos, we must start by giving them back the right to own their lives. That statement became the compass of an entire national housing mission and the beginning of one of the boldest transformations in the country's modern history. While past governments waited for international aid packages, Traoré ordered the army engineers and state enterprises to start building immediately, using local resources only. He wasn't interested in resettling people in the bureaucratic sense. He was redefining the meaning of home, not just a shelter, but the foundation of dignity. In the first phase, over 12,000 houses were planned and built across the northern central region, complete with roads, water, power, and basic infrastructure. Gone were the crowded refugee camps. In their place rose neighborhoods with schools, clinics, and communal spaces, places where life could begin again. The most radical change lay in how beneficiaries were chosen. Instead of paperwork and bureaucracy, the government created community verification groups. Each family was evaluated by their neighbors and local elders. Priority was given to widows, people with disabilities, veterans, youth-led households, and families who had lost everything to war. The process was public, transparent, and collective. No one could be excluded simply because they lacked documents. When the first home was handed over, Traoré held no ceremony, gave no speech. He simply placed a title deed in the hands of a woman, the head of her household, and said, "This is not a gift. This is your right." In that moment, many wept. For the first time in their lives, they were called homeowners, not refugees, not beneficiaries, but citizens with true standing. The policy didn't stop at housing. The government launched the One Home, One Job initiative, giving residents a chance to work on the very projects they lived in, pressing bricks, planting trees, building walls, installing solar panels. Each person was paid either in cash or in materials by choice. Thus, the program became more than relief. It became a sustainable economic cycle, powered from the bottom up. Traoré knew that if the people didn't feel ownership over change, the project would crumble like every failed aid effort before it. So he set a new rule. No one lives in a house they didn't help build. And because of that, every wall carried the fingerprints of its future owner. The same people who once survived on handouts now worked as builders, technicians, and community managers. They were not just constructing homes, they were rebuilding their faith in themselves. At first, international organizations doubted the idea. They said a poor country like Burkina Faso couldn't possibly sustain such a project on its own. But the work went on, no loans, no waiting, no apologies. Within a year, over 12,000 houses were completed, hundreds of hectares of land reclaimed, thousands of families granted ownership. The sun-baked, compressed earth houses stood firm against the Sahel winds, modest but strong, humble but filled with hope. The people began calling their new city by many names: the City of Dignity, the City of Bare Hands, or simply our home. And for Ibrahim Traoré, that was what mattered most. He never wanted to be remembered as the man who built houses, but as the leader who gave his people back the most precious right of all, the right to live with honor. From above, Trial City looks like a vast tapestry woven from red earth and sunlight. There are no skyscrapers, no tangled highways, yet every neighborhood breathes like a living organism. Each district is a complete community unit where all essential needs, school, clinic, market, well, and gathering space are within a 10-minute walk. This structure wasn't drawn on the desks of foreign architects. It was born from the memories of people who once lived in tents. They knew by heart the safe distance for children to walk to school, where a market should stand close enough to reach, far enough for peace and quiet, and where a patch of shade could let the elderly rest at noon. The houses here are not polished, but they have soul. Built from compressed earth bricks, local, sturdy, affordable, and perfectly suited to the Sahel climate, they need no air conditioners, no imported steel. Walls 20 centimeters thick keep the interiors cool in the dry season and warm at night. Roofs are slanted just enough to collect rainwater, stored in underground tanks for irrigation and washing. In less than 5 years, over 2 million Burkinabe were forced to leave the land of their birth. They walked silently along red dust roads, carrying everything they owned in a single cloth bundle. Mothers clutching children, fathers dragging wooden carts, the elderly gripping torn mats as if holding on to the last shred of home. When night fell, these internal refugees laid down plastic sheets, lit fires, and slept under a sky that no longer promised safety. Instead of chasing the European model of urbanization, Trial City was conceived as a vision of sovereign development blending tradition with homegrown technology. Electricity doesn't come from coal plants, but from the sun. Solar panels cover rooftops and public stations, connected through a mini-grid network that allows each neighborhood to function independently if the national grid fails. Greywater used water from washing and cleaning is filtered and reused through underground systems to irrigate crops and trees. These green belts surrounding the city do more than provide shade. They feed tens of thousands, create stable jobs, and help the soil retain moisture. To the surprise of many observers, Trial City also has a public fiber optic network, installed from day one. You can't talk about development while cutting people off from information, Traoré insisted. And the people those once deemed invisible were called by name, asked about their needs, handed registration forms for housing. They began to believe, even if only a little, that maybe, just maybe, this time would be different. There were no international journalists, no cameras pointing their way. Yet one by one, foundations were poured, roofs were laid. A widowed mother held her child, watching the first house completed, tears cutting through the dust on her face. Each neighborhood now has free internet access points where children learn online, youth search for jobs, and women sell their handmade goods through mobile platforms. Local governance was also reinvented from the ground up. Every neighborhood elects a community council, where seats for women and youth are not a token gesture, they are guaranteed. Decisions on budgets, safety, sanitation, and order are made and monitored by the people themselves. A place once defined by poverty is now learning to shape its own future without imitation. The city was not designed from the top down, but built from memory, labor, and faith. It stands as living proof that modernity is not something imported, it is the ability to create systems that fit your own reality. And in the golden dusk of the Sahel, the red brick rooftops gleam like a quiet promise. A new kind of progress rooted, independent, and deeply human. For decades, every time an African nation wanted to build a road, a hospital, or even a well, the same phrase always appeared: international financial conditions. It sounded neutral, but behind it lay invisible chains, loans, political commitments, and an endless cycle of dependency. Burkina Faso had long been trapped in that loop, receiving aid to survive, then repaying debt to stay poor. But when Ibrahim Traoré stood before his cabinet for the first national development meeting, he said one sentence that froze the room. From this day forward, we will not develop with other people's money. We will develop with our own dignity. That was not a slogan, it was a command. In the Trial City project, there was not a single dollar from the IMF, not a single euro from the European Union, not a cent of conditional funding from the World Bank. Everything was built with domestic funds, state enterprises, and army engineers, men once trained to dig trenches, now turning into builders of the future. When international economists predicted that the project would collapse within 3 months for lack of capital, Traoré simply smiled. He knew the nation's true capital was not stored in vaults, it was in the hands of its people. To make that vision real, the government launched a wave of parallel reforms. Military engineering units and army workshops began producing construction materials. Revenues from the National Mining Fund were redirected into infrastructure. Local cooperatives were formed to supply food, clean water, and energy to neighborhoods. As a result, money no longer leaked out of the economy, it circulated within it. Every brick pressed, every solar panel installed, every meter of fiber cable laid carried the labor of the Burkinabe themselves. What frightened the international financial institutions wasn't that Burkina Faso had found money, it was that they had found a way not to need them. It was the birth of a new model sovereign development in which a nation determines its own direction, secures its own supply chains, and takes full responsibility for its path. No more delegations of foreign experts assessing feasibility. No more 300-page reports written in a language locals couldn't read. Instead, a simple philosophy. The people know their needs better than anyone else. As Trial City began to make headlines, Western embassies in Ouagadougou reacted cautiously. They didn't openly oppose it, but diplomatic memos began to circulate, filled with polite concern, questions about sustainability, governance risks, lack of financial transparency. That is how the old world speaks, when it feels threatened, when something begins to challenge the order it built. Because if Burkina Faso, a small, landlocked nation with no oil, no ports, no major banks, could build a city for its people without borrowing a cent, then dozens of other nations would soon ask, why can't we? Across Africa, from Addis Ababa to Bamako, the term sovereign development started to spread. Young scholars treated it as a new school of thought, development not through loans, but through the reorganization of national potential. Architects from Niger came to study Burkina's local material housing model. Students in Ghana wrote theses on its land ownership mechanism. Even delegations from South America arrived to learn how a poor country could run large-scale projects without foreign credit. Once labeled sustainably poor, Burkina Faso was becoming a laboratory of self-determination, a place rewriting the rules of growth. While the world still debates whether this is a cure or a threat, the Burkinabés simply keep living, building, and proving a timeless truth. A nation can be poor in money, but it must never be poor in spirit, because they have come to understand something both simple and profound. Money can build structures, but only faith can build a nation. And that is exactly what Burkina Faso is doing, brick by brick, day by day, breath by breath, rewriting the meaning of development in its own language. At first, people called Trial City a daring political experiment. But within months, that experiment began to spill beyond Burkina Faso's borders like the dry Sahel wind carrying seeds of change. From Niger to Mali, from Ghana to Senegal, engineers, journalists, and students quietly traveled to see with their own eyes what they once believed impossible. A city built without debt, without aid, and without permission from the world. In Bamako, a group of young architects organized a forum titled, "Who Does the City Belong To?" A simple question with enormous weight. They studied every detail of Trial City's design, local materials, community governance, legal mechanisms, and energy models. The final conclusion brought the room to its feet. This isn't just construction, it's a declaration of confidence. Meanwhile, in Niamey, Niger's planners began studying the idea of an urban agricultural belt, a concept Burkina Faso had already made real. The wave didn't stop at Africa's shores. Universities in Havana, Sao Paulo, and even Tokyo began including Trial City in lectures on post-colonial urbanism. In New York, a group of African engineers launched a podcast called Sovereign Infrastructure, exploring how developing nations could grow without dependence. And on a radio show in Accra, a host asked the question, now echoing across the continent, if they can build for themselves, why are we still waiting? But every wave meets resistance. Some international organizations began expressing concerns over financial risks. Several regional banks suspended preferential credit lines for Burkina's projects, citing a need to reassess governance capacity. In Brussels, a leaked internal report carried a stark warning. The Burkina Faso self-reliance model, if it spreads, could undermine Western development influence in the Sahel. To Traoré, those words were proof they were moving in the right direction. He understood that every nation seeking freedom must pay a price, but the price of independence is always cheaper than the price of submission. In a closed meeting with young officers, he told them, they can pull their money, but they cannot pull our people's faith. They can cut the aid, but they cannot stop an idea once it catches fire. And indeed, the fire spread. In Niger, a youth collective launched Project Agadez, building 200 compressed earth homes modeled after Trial City. In Ghana, engineering students created Community Grid, a project bringing solar power to rural villages. Even in South Africa, where politics are tangled and inequality runs deep, independent mayors began exploring decentralized infrastructure inspired by Burkina's example. Across social media, the phrase urban sovereignty became a rallying cry for Africa's new generation. They posted designs, shared building plans, discussed self-reliance, and called it the movement to rebuild Africa with our own hands. No one waits for miracles from the north anymore, because now they know if Burkina Faso can do it, anyone can. Amid skepticism and pressure, Trial City still glows every night. And in that light, the world sees something money could never buy: faith spreading like fire across the windswept Sahel. And across its influence in the region. Plains of the Sahel,
Moscow
where
has
they were
finally
once
authorized
only
a
tents
nuclear
and
deal
darkness, now shine the first lights of a new dawn. From afar, they don't just illuminate new rooftops, they illuminate a spirit. The spirit of a people once written off as hopeless, now rebuilding themselves with their own hands. Those who once lived on aid now own homes, run businesses, and shape their own futures. They no longer wait for food distributions. They plant, produce, and govern. What was once called a miracle has quietly become the new normal in everyday Burkinabe life. This transformation was not born of money, but of faith. Every brick in Trial City was laid by someone who once doubted they'd ever have a real home. Every wall was raised by hands that once only knew how to pitch a tent. And in that act, more than in the finished structures, lay the true meaning of the project. Because when people are included in rebuilding their world, they are not just constructing houses, they are reconstructing the dignity of their nation, a dignity eroded for decades by poverty, debt, and dependency. A journalist from Ghana, after visiting Trial City, wrote, "What struck me most wasn't the houses or the roads, it was the people. They speak about the future as if it has already arrived." And indeed, it has. Faith has turned into energy flowing through every neighborhood, every family. Young people form startups in eco-friendly construction. Women organize cooperatives to make bricks and process farm produce. Children attend the first school ever built by their own community. Elders teach traditional languages to the youth, fearing that as the city grows, the old words might fade away. Some international organizations began expressing concerns over financial risks. Several regional banks suspended preferential credit lines for Burkina's projects, citing a need to reassess governance capacity. In Brussels, a leaked internal report carried a stark warning. The Burkina Faso self-reliance model, if it spreads, could undermine Western development influence in the Sahel. To Traoré, those words were proof they were moving in the right direction. As the world begins to grasp the true scale of Trial City, even skeptics are forced to rethink Africa. No longer just a continent of crises, but the stage for the most daring social experiment of the century, a place where development is not measured in GDP or currency exchange, but in the ability of people to stand back up. Yes, challenges remain. Drought, inflation, and external pressure will test them still. But Burkina Faso now possesses something money can never buy: an unshakable moral foundation. They no longer speak of independence as a slogan, they live it every single day. At night, as the sun dips behind the red hills, the compressed earth houses glow with stored solar light. Children run through freshly paved streets, laughter echoing under the desert stars. It is more than the picture of a city, it is the portrait of a nation reborn. They posted designs, shared building plans, discussed self-reliance, and called it the movement to rebuild Africa with our own hands. No one waits for miracles from the north anymore, because now they know if Burkina Faso can do it, anyone can. Amid skepticism and pressure, Trial City still glows every night. And in that light, the world sees something money could never buy: Faith spreading like fire across the windswept Sahel. There is no victory parade, no triumphant anthem. Yet every brick, every garden, every smile is a hymn of Burkina Faso's rebirth. Looking back, it's clear. This is no longer a housing project, it is a silent revolution. A revolution not waged in parliament, but on the dusty plains. Not written in policy papers, but in the sweat of farmers, soldiers, and children who once slept under plastic tents. Burkina Faso is not merely building a city, it is rebuilding faith for an entire continent. In a world where aid has become a tool, where development too often means dependence, the rise of Trial City rings like a wake-up bell. It reminds us that true freedom does not come from loans, but from the courage to build. That true wealth is not stored in banks, but in trust between people. And that human dignity can never be given. It must be reclaimed, inch by inch, home by home, generation by generation. What Ibrahim Traoré and the people of Burkina Faso have built is not just for themselves. It is a message to every nation ever labeled poor. That poverty is not a sentence, it is a starting point. That people are only defeated when they stop believing in themselves. And that even in a century clouded by doubt, there are still those who choose to build faith with their hands, rather than wait for miracles from elsewhere. As the evening breeze carries the scent of fresh soil and the rhythm of distant drums, you realize that this city does not belong only to Burkina Faso. It belongs to all who believe that humanity can rewrite its own destiny. Perhaps the greatest gift Trial City offers is not its homes, but a mirror inviting each of us to ask, do we still believe in our own ability to rise? So as you reach this moment, don't just see a distant African nation. And at the heart of Trial City, the flag of Burkina Faso flutters in the warm Sahel wind, reminding the world of the vow that built it. We do not need pity, we only need to be believed in. The Sahel sun sinks slowly, painting the compressed earth rooftops of Trial City in deep red. From afar, the city seems alive, each small light flickering to life amid sand and wind, announcing to the world that a people once thought exhausted are now breathing again through their own hands. And perhaps one day, you will be the one telling the story of a place where freedom was built by human hands. Because the future never waits to be given, it belongs only to those brave enough to build it themselves.